This will be the toughest lecture you hear all week. We're going to have some good, solid, substantial stuff to say after this, but this is going to be the one which, if I'm going to lose you, I'll probably lose you in this hour. So I'm going to tell you ahead of time, please stick with me. Just a few more strokes underwater till we get these basics down. And then I'm going to do what you all have been waiting for all week. I'm going to show you how to start dismantling the unbeliever's worldview. But in order to do it well, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know what you're dealing with. I have told you that everyone has a worldview. You have one, the unbeliever has one. When the unbeliever wants you to be neutral, he is trying to neutralize you, to take away your worldview and then continue using his own, which amounts to winning the debate by default, right? He will not give up his presuppositions. It's impossible to do so. And you mustn't give up your presuppositions. Self-consciously, you know where you're coming from, you know why you believe what you do, you know how you're supposed to live your life in terms of it, and now what you're going to do is show him that his plane's heading for Boston, and he doesn't really get out at Chicago as he hopes. Everyone has an underlying philosophy, and so that leads me to tell you what philosophy is. I have well, you probably know people like this too, but I know an individual. Everyone believes a lot of things. I'm only going to talk about two things this individual believes. On the one hand, this individual that I know believes that we cannot hold homosexuals accountable for their sexual, what we think is perversion, because they were made that way. Well, he says made that way, but he doesn't really have in mind a personal God making them as homosexuals. He means they come into the world with this disposition. It's almost like they've been programmed to have a sexual desire for members of the same race, same gender. On the other hand, this individual who thinks we should not hold homosexuals accountable because they were made that way thinks that, and he has some pretty choice language that I wouldn't want to share in a Christian audience. We ought to go in and get that blankety-blank Saddam Hussein and blow the blankety-blank stuff right out of his head. Okay? Now, does this person have a philosophy? He doesn't sound like a sophisticated philosopher when he talks that way and so forth. But I'm just asking you, does he have a philosophy? It's a very profound philosophy. And let's look at the elements of that philosophy as an example or a specimen real quickly. First of all, this individual believes that people are not responsible for what they do because they are programmed. They are like, if you will, white rats in a psychological experiment. And they've been conditioned in their responses according to their conditioning. Homosexuals have come into this world not just conditioned, but they've come in biologically preset to have sexual relations or desires of a certain kind. Okay? So is that a view of human nature? It's a profound view of human nature. We're not responsible because that's just the way we are. We can't help it. Now, this person has another view of the world, and in this particular case, he has a view of human society and how it's organized. And though I find it a disgusting view, actually I find the other one disgusting too, but I find it disgusting for him to think that somehow we are the anointed, and in the United States we have the right to go around the world and just blow the brains out of any dictator that we don't happen to like, or who might get in the way of our having oil prices, and gasoline prices where we want them. I find that a disgusting political philosophy. But it is a philosophy. And it has been followed. There are people who can give you a more sophisticated rundown of that philosophy than this individual, but that is a philosophy. It is his philosophy. I want to point out one other thing about this person who says homosexuals can't help it and we ought to blow Saddam Hussein's brains out. There's one other thing, and I hope you've all caught on to it. His political philosophy and his philosophy of man are in diametric conflict, and he doesn't even know it. Because he hasn't bothered to do philosophy self-consciously. He just has wandered over here and thought this about that subject, and wandered over here and thought this about that subject, and he's never tried to regiment his thinking. But he does have a philosophy. Now, do you see what the conflict is? He says homosexuals can't help what they do. Well, guess what? If that's your view of human nature, Saddam Hussein can't help what he does either. And if that's the case, then if you're not going to punish homosexuals because they're made that way, what gives you the right to punish Saddam Hussein, who was made that way? Do you see the point? He has a profound philosophy, but it's not a philosophy that's in agreement with itself. Everybody has a philosophy. This is one of the points I want you to get out of today's lecture. Everyone has a philosophy. The issue is not whether you do philosophy. The issue is not whether you do philosophy, but how well you will do it. People do not decide to do philosophy or not to do philosophy because it is unavoidable to do philosophy. The only question is whether we will do our philosophical thinking reflectively, consistently, and well. The ordinary man in the street, as we like to put it, the ordinary man in the street is distinguished from the philosopher by his lack of resolve to answer the fundamental questions of life in a consistent, self-conscious, reflective way. The difference between him and the philosopher is only one of degree. But all men are philosophers, and all women too. All men are philosophers, but not all men aim to be good ones. This may seem a little surprising to you. It's as though you're going off to college and you're going to choose a major, and what I've told you is that everyone's doing philosophy. Well, it's true. Everyone's doing philosophy, and I'm going to vindicate what may seem to be an elitism and self-centered idea of philosophy in just a minute. But in one sense, my choosing to be a philosophy major and get a PhD in philosophy made it easier on me than on other people, because what I decided to study is what everybody thinks about all the time anyway. I didn't have to choose marine biology, even though I've never been to the ocean, or to be a doctor and go into human anatomy, or to be a historian and find out things about the War of 1812 I never was interested in the first place. I just had to keep thinking about what I was always thinking about. You're saying, oh, but you must have been a real strange child, Dr. Bahnsen. We know that because you listen to that music. No, I don't, I really, well, you know, you can't live in other people's heads, and so I can't be sure of this, but I don't think I was terribly different from the kids I went to high school with. I played tennis, basketball, I was student body president, went to Boys State, like Gary did, went off to college, had a girlfriend. I mean, it just seemed like life for me was like everybody else. It's not as though I sat around more reflectively than other people. So that's not what I'm saying. It's not like I started having thoughts about Plato and Aristotle in 7th grade, and then I finally went off to college and got to think about it. No, what I'm saying is every human being thinks about these questions, but not every human being decides to stick to it. You know, you can take the most redneck neighbor you know, and that person at some time in his life has wondered what is real and what's not real. You don't think so? Everybody who decides that Santa Claus is not real has done some degree of philosophy. Isn't that right? Has decided, well, Santa Claus was an idea. My mom and dad are real. Okay? So I'm saying everyone does philosophy, but not everyone sticks with it. In fact, a lot of people don't understand the nature of philosophy, and once they see what it looks like to do philosophy well, get kind of disgusted with it or bored by it or say, oh, who wants to do that? And I'm going to give you this much. If you jump into a discussion between philosophers at the midpoint of the discussion and don't understand where that argument came from, I think philosophy looks pretty silly. And that's why jokes are told about philosophers, you know, these armchair intellectuals who sit around saying, why is there air? Okay? I had a lit prof in college who, by the way, supported my being a philosophy major. He wanted me to be a lit major worse, but, you know, but he would joke with me sometimes. And he would say, well, you know, the person who came up with the 3 laws of thought, that A is A and A is not A at the same time, must have spent a lot of time on that. You know, he was like tongue-in-cheek making fun of these philosophical axioms. People do that, but the reason they can get away with making fun of philosophers is because they don't know where a philosophical problem comes from. So I'm going to tell you where they come from. Everybody is naturally curious. right? Unless you have, you know, really brain dead, some kind of problem, if you're an imbecile, if you have normal brain development, everyone is curious. Children don't, in fact, if a baby were to lie in the crib and not reach out for the mobile or ever recognize the face of mom, so forth, we would know there was something seriously and sadly wrong with the baby. Human beings have been made curious. God made us curious. I believe that curiosity is part of the image of God in the sense that He made us to have dominion over this world, to learn about this world, and to control this world and respond to this world in a way that gives glory to Him and obeys Him. And that begins very early with curiosity. Infants try to control their environment, just like we try to control our environment as adults. Infants eventually try to control their crib, you know, whether they organize the toys or not. They want to know what the toys do, and they want to have the toys there when they want their toys. They want the world to be an efficient place in which to live at their infant level. Okay, so we're all curious. Now, praise God, we don't stay just infants in our mentality, because a child's curiosity, you may have noticed, is not systematic. Child will be interested in beating the pots and pans for a while, and then without you apparently seeing any reasoning process or decision-making, choice-making going on, we'll just give up the pots and pans and go over and do something else. Do some scribbling here, and often they don't have the, you know, the decency to clean up after themselves. They just, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Would anyone ever get educated and get very far in this world if their thinking was just that disjointed, just whatever catches your attention, you know, and then they, you know, they hear a bell over here and they go over and do that and so forth. But eventually we grow up and we go to school and we learn to sit still for 45 minutes and to have a lesson in grammar or math or whatever. Education, the process of education, systematizes our curiosity and teaches us to reduce our experience of the world to generalizations. I know this is not what you wanted to come and hear, but just bear with me for a few minutes. This is what the process of intellectual growth is all about, and this is what the educational process tries to develop. Your ability to reduce the diversity of your experience to certain law-like generalizations. And so we learn about what happens when you put blue and yellow together. You know, I learned that in kindergarten. What do blue and yellow make? Green. That's right. Now, if I'd been left to my own, I doubt that I would have ever stopped, you know, to systematize that. But it's not just how colors go together or numbers go together or how we construct bridges or how we play a game and show sportsmanship or whatever it is I'm learning in school. The whole education process is a matter of higher and higher levels of generalization, reducing the diversity of the world to law-like principles and generalizations. Okay, so we've moved from childlike curiosity to being more disciplined in our thinking. Now what happens is when you start generalizing about your experience in the world, you're going to find certain conflicts come to mind. You start generalizing about human nature. You don't call it human nature, but you realize that this guy who sits 2 desks over from you, that if you go out there and try to get in line before him, he's going to sock you. Okay? This is a very low-level, infant-like or child-like understanding, but you begin to realize there are some people who are bullies in this world. And other people you can bully and they won't do anything about it. I'm sorry to remind you of our disgusting past, but all of us have learned that. We've learned you don't cross certain individuals, other people, it's okay. You learn that some people are pleasant to be around, other people aren't. You've learned that some people like math, some people like biology. You start realizing there's a difference between human beings. Now, what if you were to generalize from that? Well, then what makes people happy is relative. Some people are like this, some people are like that, everything is relative. Well, you're pretty satisfied with that. Most people are satisfied and live comfortably with their relativism, and most people are relativist. Sadly, in our culture, they believe that because people have different tastes, then all values are up for grabs. It's just a matter of what pleases you. Okay? Now let's put that aside for a minute, this idea that everyone's free and therefore relativism rules when it comes to human nature. We also learn in biology and chemistry class and other hard sciences that there are things that work together in a causal relationship. Or if you're playing billiards, you know, and you hit the cue ball across the table, hit the 10 ball at a certain angle, certain velocity, and so forth, it's going to, you know, careen off the side of the pool table, go into the pocket. We start learning geometric relations and all that. And none of us believe, and none of us even worry about the fact that once you've learned how to hit the 10 ball in when it's in that position, that tomorrow when it's in that position, you can't use the same technique and get the same effect. We believe that the cue ball and the 10 ball and the billiard table have a relationship where it isn't like different strokes for different folks, you know, for different balls on the table and the cue ball on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It just always operates that way. And you may not call it this, but what you are learning about is causal relationships. You learn that in the chemistry lab. You learn that about the human body and so forth. Well, actually, before you got to school and systematized it, you learned it at home, too. When you put your hand on Mom's hot stove, you said, ouch. The next day, you didn't say, well, the world's a random place. Maybe it won't hurt today. No, you just said, well, I live in a causal universe. This is a little 3-year-old. I live in a causal universe, and given the nexus of all these relationships, I know that it's going to burn my flesh, and that is not going to feel good. Okay, so we're growing up, and we're learning certain generalizations about the world. Now we've got two generalizations. The world operates in a causal fashion, a law-like fashion. But we have another generalization, and that's that everyone's different and everything's relative. And when the day comes, maybe for some of you it hasn't come yet, but when the day comes, when you say, how do I bring these two things together? How do I incorporate the generalization that everything operates in a law-like way to the generalization people are free and make different decisions? When you ask, how can I bring those two things together, you've started doing philosophy. Now, if I build things up in this way, it makes perfectly good sense for you to do philosophy. To stop and think about it. You say, well, why should I care what the answer to that question is? Well, here's one reason to care. Let's say somebody has murdered your mother. I'm sorry to take a very unhappy subject, but I want you to think clearly about this. Someone has murdered your mother. I'll tell you what's going to come into your mind. No matter who you are, what your personality type is, you're going to want revenge. Now, if you think of the world as a place where causal relationships rule supreme, then you might come to the conclusion, well, it makes no sense for me to want to see this person get executed who killed my mother, because just like things fall through space given the law of gravity, given the laws of human nature, this person couldn't help what he did in killing my mother. On the other hand, if you take the approach that it's different strokes for different folks, different people have different personalities, you might say, I don't even have to wait for the state to convict this guy. I'm just going to play out my initial response and go kill this guy. Neither one would be right, by the way. But you see, important decisions are made on the basis of your generalization about the nature of reality, how you know what you know, and how you should live your life. So when we ask the question, should we execute murderers, people, you will find, will defend their answer to the question by taking a step back and resting on their view, their generalization about the world or human nature or whatever it may be. That is, people end up defending their view of very important issues by falling back on their philosophical assumptions. Or to take it another way, if you listen to the development of this curiosity, to the development of generalization as a mindset, to how you now reconcile different generalizations, then doing philosophy makes a lot of sense. But now put either one of those away. Put away the idea that you have to have a philosophy to defend your judgments about executing people or how money should be spent or whatever. Put away the psychological development up to the place where you have to reconcile what appear to be irreconcilable generalizations in the world. Put all that aside, and let me just tell you about a philosophical problem. Leibniz was a German theologian and philosopher, reflected upon the identity of indiscernibles in intentional context. An indiscernible is something that you cannot tell apart from another member of that class by its characteristics. An intentional context is one that is oblique because we're dealing with an epistemic notion of belief, hope, or knowledge. So, if I say that the man standing in the corner is Samuel Clemens, follow me? The man standing in the corner is Samuel Clemens, premise 1. Premise 2 is Samuel Clemens is identical with Mark Twain. May I conclude that I know that the man standing in the corner is Mark Twain? No, you cannot. You cannot use elementary first-order logic in intentional context, because I may know that that's Samuel Clemens, and it may be true that Samuel Clemens is identical with Mark Twain, but I may not know that identity. And therefore, you cannot conclude that I know that the man in the corner is Mark Twain. Now, that's known as the indiscernibility of identicals in intentional context. Now, if I had come today and started with that, you're saying, boy, this guy has lost it. What is going on now? If you just woke up when I was talking about that, you'd say, that's what I thought of philosophy. What a bunch of... No, that is not bogus. We're not going to do the bogus sign on that. That's really important. But if you jump in right there, then philosophy looks really abstract and really weird and not tied down to anything important. And that's why philosophers get a bum rap. But I hope you'll understand from my discussion of how we end up doing philosophy. Everyone does philosophy. The difference is not everyone does it well. The guy who says, let's blow, Saddam Hussein's brains out, but not hold homosexuals accountable for their perversion, he hasn't done his philosophy well. He hasn't even been systematic about what he believes about this world and human nature. But he's doing philosophy. And you do philosophy, whether you become philosophy majors or not. And your roommate will do philosophy, and your professors will do philosophy. Everyone does philosophy. So what is it to do philosophy? Let me tell you the two tasks of philosophy. First of all, there is a critical task that the philosopher goes through. The philosopher cross-examines people's opinions. This is what makes philosophers very popular. Nah, it's not true. That's why Socrates was executed. You see, Socrates would go around talking to people because they said they knew what justice was, they knew what beauty was, and they had this great exact knowledge of things, and Socrates would just ask them questions and lead them along and show that they really didn't know what they were talking about after all. They had not systematized their thinking or generalizations about experience in the world. And for that they killed him. So I'm sorry, and it's still today true. I know there are people who probably don't like me very much, because as a philosopher, I've been called upon to ask them questions about what they believe and to do cross-examination. That is called the critical task of philosophy. That's where philosophers are analytical. They try to draw distinctions. They try to look for logical relationships. They try to get people to make sure they have evidence for what they say and they aren't being arbitrary. The critical task of philosophy. The critical task of philosophy seeks reliable presuppositions for all of our thinking. I'm going to indicate that up here on the sheet of paper by drawing a foundation for a building. Now, in this foundation, I'm looking for presuppositions, underlying assumptions that are reliable with respect to the nature of reality. The nature of reality, the study of the nature of reality, is called metaphysics. I'll just put meta here. Physics you can fill in, okay? Metaphysics. What lies beyond the physical world? What is the nature of the world in which we live? Where did it come from? What's its structure? What kinds of things are real? Are angels real? Before you answer, I just want to tell you that's a metaphysical question. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? That is a metaphysical question. And you say, aha, what a beautiful illustration of how silly philosophy is, Dr. Bahnsen. Well, before we go on, let me just tell you that common illustration of the futility and the peripheral nature of philosophy was just a tantalizing way of expressing a very deep and important metaphysical question. And the metaphysical question is, What is the basis of individuation? That is, what makes you different from me? What makes any two things in a particular class different from one another? And there are two ways of answering that, and both have apparently good arguments for them. One way of answering that is to say they are distinguished by their characteristics. You and I are both in the class of human beings, or at least one of us is. You and I are both in the class of human beings, but your nose doesn't look like my nose. So I have a characteristic, or you have a characteristic that differs. So those characteristics set us apart. Another answer is to say, you're a human being, I'm a human being, but what sets us apart is that there's different matter in you than there is in me. It's just like your mom had laid out the cookie dough there, and she has this little cookie cutter for, gingerbread men, and then, cuts out one, cuts out a second. They both look alike, they're both human beings, but the dough that is in one is different than the dough that is in the other. Okay? I'm trying to bring it down, to your level to make it interesting. We don't usually talk about people being, the doughboy and all that, but... Now, if angels are distinguished by immaterial matters, such as characteristics, and they are not distinguished by physical matter, then how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? If they don't take up any material space, how many can fit on the head of a pin? Come on, wake up. An infinite number can, because there is no material limit. But if angels are distinguished by their materiality, by the dough that goes into them, if you will, then how many angels could fit on the head of the pin? You'd have a tough time with one, wouldn't you? So when medieval philosophers allegedly put out that little conundrum, how many angels can dance on the head of the pin, that was just a cute way of asking about a very profound question. Is matter what individuates things, or are characteristics what individuate things? Those are metaphysical type questions. Does God exist? Where did the world come from? Does man have a soul? Is there a life after death? These are metaphysical questions. The philosopher critically examines what people says, looking for their metaphysical assumptions, and says which ones are reliable. Secondly, philosophy is interested in epistemology, from the Greek word episteme, meaning knowledge. What is the nature and the limits of human knowledge? How do you know what you know? You take these things for granted. Just let me show you how sloppy you have been in doing your philosophy. If I say, how do you know that your mother loves you? And you say, well, I remember things she's done for me. She clothed me. She took care of me when I was sick. She gives me Christmas presents. She kisses me goodbye. She writes me letters, whatever it may be. And I'm going to say, well, how do you know she did those things? You say, well, I remember. I say, oh, well, how do you know that memory is reliable? Now what are you going to do? How do you know memory is reliable? No one has any answers? What? You know memory is reliable because you remember that your memory was reliable when you tested it last time, right? Which is begging the question. If you use memory to support memory, then of course you've got yourself into a loop of justification. I don't know. Maybe y'all are not going to sleep very well tonight. Maybe your mothers don't love you. And we also look for reliable presuppositions with respect to ethics. How should we live our lives? Again, I refer to my neighbor who thinks homosexuals can't help doing what they do, but Saddam Hussein can. How he lives his life is based upon certain presuppositions about human conduct which are not even well thought out. The philosopher does a critical task of looking for those presuppositions which are reliable about reality, knowledge, and human conduct, ethics. But that's only one thing the philosopher does. And everyone's a philosopher. Not everyone is a professional philosopher, not everyone does it well, but everyone's got views about reality, how we know what we know, and how we should live our lives. Now, on the basis of these presuppositions, when you go into the different departments at the university, you'll find that teachers will will do research, and they'll lay out for you in lectures and in textbooks truths about different areas of life. And so I'm going to symbolize the different departments of the university outside of philosophy by pillars in this building. We might think about this pillar being history, what we have learned about ancient history, U.S. history, whatever it may be. Now, by drawing the picture in this way, what I'm saying is the historian has a separate task to do, but he can't do it without a foundation in metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. He's a philosopher too, but then you see he goes and he applies his philosophy to the area of history. Another area of study, we're not going to cover them all, but you'll get the point here, biology. The biology teacher is interested in getting law-like generalizations about living things. And his or her generalizations rest upon a philosophy about the nature of reality, how he knows or she knows what they do, and how we should live our lives. So there are other areas in the university curriculum, or if we get out of the educational context, other areas of life about which we could learn. We could put down astronomy, we could put down human literature and music, and on and on. Whenever you think about literature, whenever you think about music, whenever you think about history, whenever you think about astronomy, we could put shopping down. Whenever you think about shopping, there is an implicit philosophy that informs you. You say, oh, that shopping stuff. That's true. You have to have a philosophy when you go shopping too. I don't mean a philosophy about how to get the best prices and so forth. What if your philosophy, what if you were a good Hindu? Would a good Hindu ever go shopping? What do Hindus say about the nature of reality? All is Maya. All is illusion. Well, if everything is illusion, then of course the difference between 9 and 12 is an illusion. So when you went shopping, you never would know whether to buy a dozen eggs or only 9 eggs, would you? And if all is illusion, why would you pay for anything on the way out the door? Wouldn't that be great? You get out to the car and somebody runs up to you, hey, you didn't pay for those groceries. What groceries? All is illusion. In fact, you're an illusion. Out of here. See, you can't operate in this world without some view of reality, how you know what you know, and how you should live your life. Okay, so everyone has a basic philosophy. The first task of philosophy is to critically examine people's assumptions to find reliable presuppositions about metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Now the second task of philosophy, what's missing in our building here? There's no roof. That's right. The rain comes in. So we've got to tie all this together, which I'll symbolize by means of this roof. You've got to put something over the top of all the things that you have learned. You need not only a critically established and reliable foundation for your thinking in all these areas, but you need something that draws all these areas together into what's called a unified worldview. You see, once we've done all of our study in literature and history and biology and physics, somebody's got to ask the question, what's it all about, Alfie? How do you bring all this together? So what is man? Is he just an animal? Or is he something capable of love? Is he something that's wretched and destroys and murders and rapes and steals? Or is he something that is close to God? What is man, and how should we live our lives? And what is life all about? And what is the meaning of life? Now, you know, those are questions that are sometimes ridiculed. People will make fun of me. It's kind of like, you know, getting really deep and philosophical, asking about the meaning of life. Well, guess what? You can make fun of it, but everybody asks the question. Everybody says, what am I here for? Was I really born just to be raised so that I could get a job, so that I could get married and have babies that are raised to get jobs and get married to have babies that are raised to get jobs? Is that really all it's about? Is that why we're here? People get real philosophical when their friends die. And I've held a lot of hands with people that have had a hard time getting through that. People who have sometimes said they would rather have died than to have to endure the agony of having their best friend not be there anymore. Why is it that we have funerals for human beings, and unless you're a bizarre Southern Californian, you don't have funerals for your pets? Why do we have memorial services? What is that all about? You know, we're getting down to what's really tough. And, you know, at a time like that, I thank God that He gave me an interest in doing philosophy. I have a lot of people make fun of that. Sometimes it seems like it's not all that practical and helpful. But, you know, when the going gets tough, you're glad that you have the toughness to answer. You need answers. What is life all about? How do I relate what I've learned in the political science classroom to what I've learned in the literature classroom to what I've learned in the psychological lab? How do these things tie together? That's what philosophers do. Philosophers don't do a lot of this really good, detailed, interesting stuff in between, but they help us lay a foundation, and they help us tie it all together when it's done. What is a worldview? Here's my definition. A worldview is a network of presuppositions which are not tested by natural science, and in terms of which all experience is related and interpreted. I'm going to go slow and say it again. A worldview is a network of presuppositions, not tested by natural science, in terms of which all experience is related and interpreted. First of all, it's a network of presuppositions. Those most basic convictions we have about reality, how we know what we know and how we should live our lives, that network of convictions, here seen as the foundation, that network of convictions is our worldview. And it's in terms of them that we test everything else. That's why I said, secondly, it is not tested by natural science. You don't test your ultimate commitments by natural science because natural science rests upon ultimate commitments. The very methods of natural science depend upon your view of reality. Why haven't Hindus developed, extensive courses in medicine and industrial technology? Well, I just told you, Hindus believe all is Maya. That doesn't give you a lot of motivation for developing natural science and the output of natural science. Your network of presuppositions tells you the nature of science, the method you use in science, and how to interpret science. And so it is not tested by science. It's only in terms of those presuppositions that you can do science. I'm going to say that again for the sake of you who might be drifting off. Your network of presuppositions cannot be tested by natural science because it's only in terms of those presuppositions that natural science makes sense. Okay, a worldview is a network of presuppositions not tested by natural science, and in terms of which all of experience is related and interpreted. So what I've got in my definition is the foundation and roof aspects of philosophy. A network of presuppositions that helps you tie together all of life and make sense of it. Helps you understand beauty and justice and human dignity and logic and science and the meaning of life. One more time. A worldview. And you're saying, why is he repeating it so many times? Because tomorrow you're going to repeat it to me. We're going to close on our notebooks and we're going to do this as a class exercise. And if you cannot do it, and if I find anybody's mouth not moving and telling me the right definition, there'll be no more music for you the rest of this week. I'm telling you. I'll just listen to it in my room and you won't get to hear it. Okay, now, a worldview is a network of presuppositions not tested by natural science, in terms of which all experience is related and interpreted. Real quickly, before we run out of time, you need to know this about worldviews. Worldviews are package deals. Recently, my family had the blessing, provided by other people who love us for the most part, the blessing of going to Hawaii. I didn't think I'd ever get to do that. God, and through the generosity of God's people, that was made possible. We went to Hawaii. 2 of my kids graduated from high school. We all went to Hawaii. It was a great time. But now, when you go to Hawaii, We didn't do it this way, but you will notice that there are all sorts of travel agencies out there that offer you package deals. You know, you're supposed to get, I don't think you really get that great a deal, but you're supposed to get a cut, you know, on the airfare and on the hotel and food and entertainment and so forth if you take the package deal. But you see, if you take the package deal, you don't get to make your own decisions. On this day you go to the luau and you have to go to this hotel and you eat in this place and you fly when they tell you on this airline and so forth. Now you all understand that. It may not be your choice, but you know what a package deal is. You don't get to make substitutions. Worldviews are package deals. People don't go in and say, well, I'll take a little bit out of this worldview, a little bit out of this worldview, and make fruit salad from my philosophy. Now, worldviews, you will see as we go along, worldviews have interrelationships between the various beliefs that are found. You will not find a person who is an empiricist in epistemology who holds to Plato's view of reality. Plato believed that the most ultimate reality was ideal, or in the realm of ideas. It's translated sometimes as forms. Okay? You all know what an idea is over against the particulars of which that instantiate the idea? Sure you do. You know Huey, Dewey, and Louie, right? What are Huey, Dewey, and Louie? I'm not going to go on until I get the right answer. They are three ducks. So, you must have the idea of duckness, right? Now, where is the idea of duckness? Don't say in your head, because if it's in your head when you die, there goes the idea of duckness. Where is the idea of duckness? Is it out there on the pond? Huey, Dewey, and Louie are out on the pond. So the particulars are out there. So where's the duckness idea of which they are the instances? Plato said that exists outside of this world. It's not part of time and space. There's a realm of ideas or forms, okay? Now all I'm telling you is, if you have that view of reality, that ultimate reality is idea, not flesh and blood, here and now, time and space particulars, you will not be an empiricist in your view of the theory of knowledge. You will not say, we know what we know because of our senses. Now, can you see why that would be? If ultimate reality is outside of time and space, then something that is in time and space cannot be the way you know about it. Okay. Worldviews are package deals. It's not as though people say, well, I'll take a little bit of this kind of metaphysic and a little bit of this kind of epistemology. Oh, no, yeah, I like that kind of ethic too. And then we'll just weave them together. They don't always go together. There is a way in which ideas comport with each other in worldviews. Because worldviews are the crux in our defense of the Christian faith, and because worldviews are a package deal, you need to understand, first of all, that your Christian commitment means you've made a commitment for all of life. Everything you think and do is tied to your Christian commitment. And you need to know as well that the challenging of your Christianity at any point implicitly challenges everything that you believe as a Christian, implicitly, and vice versa as well. When the unbeliever's worldview can be attacked at one point, the unbeliever's worldview is facing dismantling at all points. And when we get together again, Lord willing, now that you understand what's going on and what worldviews and philosophies are, I'm going to show you how to do a lot of internal destruction with the unbeliever's worldview.